Should we tell our listening audience that Drew is in Farm to Market's jail because he made inappropriate
Yeah,
comments at a party? Was caught on a hot mic.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, did not meet the terms of Coco Enterprises.
Standards.
Yeah, yeah. What were you? Why
Standards.
were you banned from Facebook?
Me?
Yeah, what was the reason they used?
Because my name didn't meet the community standards.
Yeah, we'll just say his comments didn't meet Coco Enterprises community standards for. All right, welcome to episode 60. The topics for today are the windfall tax, the Chinese stock market, and more lightning round questions at the end. President Biden called on Congress to penalize oil and gas companies if they do not use their profits to help lower energy costs for consumers, which slaps back to the crude oil windfall profit tax of the Carter administration. The president stated, at a time of war, any company receiving historic windfall profits like this has a responsibility to act beyond the narrow self-interest of its executive and shareholders. Are oil companies taking advantage of consumers in a time of crisis, or are they being unfairly scapegoated?
So I'm going to go with unfairly scapegoated. I'll come at this from two different angles. First of all, this is not wartime for the United States, at least not officially. There's been no congressional declaration of war. There's been no continuing resolution on anything. Not even what did they call it back in the War on Terror days? Authorization for the use of force. We don't have anything like that. At most, we've had some legislation that's transferred money and guns to another country. Ukraine is not an official ally. They're not in NATO. They're not in the EU. We don't have a security treaty with them. Regardless of whether you think we should or shouldn't be intervening in the conflict, the United States is not at war. So you can't be a war profiteer if your country is not at war. Second of all, this is a horrible idea to do a windfall tax. I don't know why so many people can't understand that when oil is a global market, that you have to pay global prices unless you segregate the United States economy off from the global economy or the oil market. So right now, the Biden administration should be doing everything possible to encourage production, not threatening oil companies with increased taxes, which will only have the effect to decrease production. It's only going to make the problem worse. There are ways that you could potentially insulate to some extent the U.S. economy from global energy prices. That's a whole nother discussion as well. But if you're going to keep the American oil and energy markets globalized, you're going to end up paying global prices. So the Biden administration is going to have to figure out whether it wants to continue that arrangement or not. And if it really wants to do a windfall tax, they should be ready for the American consumer to just pay even more for energy.
This windfall tax will never see the light of day. It's not going through Congress. Which congressman in a swing state is going to come out saying, yeah, I'm going to support this? John Fetterman, where a huge part of the Pennsylvania economy is pumping oil? No, it defies logic. It defies history. It defies economic theory. And all this is a naked pandering to populism a week before the midterm elections. I don't even think that anybody besides maybe President Biden thinks that there's even a snowball's chance that this would ever get through Congress. It's not going to happen. It has got to be the dumbest idea of how you increase oil production or oil supply is by punishing people for being successful at a very short period of time in history. Where was the federal government, pandering to the basic needs of oil companies when they had so much oil and so little demand 2 years ago that they had to pay folks to take the oil? There for a brief time that they were actually giving away oil because they had so much of it. It's not like the oil companies are wealthy every year. There's booms and busts. And there's a lot of families along the Gulf of Mexico, even in eastern Montana, who have seen both feast and famine in the oil business. But I'm going to say that this will never see the light of day, and B, I say this is a really bad idea.
I think Joe's got himself in a knife fight in a phone booth. And I think we've maybe talked about this before, but you have historically, or you have high oil prices at a time that the Federal Reserve is diametrically opposed to what the Biden administration is asking them to do. So the Federal Reserve is trying to get the economy to slow down. So oil companies respond to that and produce less oil. And you're asking them to produce more oil, which would crash the price of oil, which would make it cheaper, but it would have larger detrimental effects. So if he were to use some of the tools that he has in America to reduce the price of a barrel of oil, he would basically alienate his political base. So he doesn't have a lot of paths forward here. So I think Joe's right. I think this is just a talking point. This happened in the Carter administration, and it ended up in 1.6 billion fewer barrels of oil during the time that the original Windfall Act. I shouldn't say the original, but the last time this was enacted, it ended up in fewer barrels of oil being produced, and also generated the term if you want less of something, tax it. So oil companies, and if you're going to tax their profits, are going to be less incentivized to produce more of it. So if you're asking them to make more oil and or to produce more oil, and then tax it, that doesn't work out either. Things you could possibly do is, the Jones Act has been, a big thing around the internet, and basically prevents, ships going to different American ports. So for instance, if you wanted to ship oil from Alaska to Texas, you have to do it on an American-built boat with an American captain with an American crew, and that limits, some of the, it makes it more expensive because essentially you have a bunch of union workers doing that. Whereas if you suspended the Jones Act or just got rid of it, you would be able to get more, newer ships, and allow them to ship oils from different U.S. ports at cheaper costs. And then you got, and they could do that in the Chesapeake Bay, the entire shoreline of Texas, I guess, is pretty deep water, which is ideal for these, large, oil tankers or whatever. And then, you could open up some shipping in the Mississippi, and that would all take pressure off the price of a barrel of oil. So, yeah, I think it's just talking points, and because there's really nothing else to do at this point.
Politicians, their version of long term is till the next poll or survey,
right?
And a lot of these questions are focus group tested before they roll out. But if you're an oil investor, why would you bet on long term oil when you've got a president and a Congress, as we currently do, who said that we're doing everything we possibly can to destroy you as soon as we have the chance to do so? So now we have a situation where, because of the war in Ukraine, there is a global energy shortage. And right now, alternative forms of energy are unreliable. They're very expensive. But when oil gets cheap, it makes alternative forms of energy much more attractive. If you are trying to protect your long-term viability, wouldn't you want supply to be low so that people would continue to want you, as opposed to flood the market with a administration who says that if we get a chance, we're going to destroy you? The rhetoric from 2 days ago is scaring the daylights out of these energy companies today. We shouldn't expect anything different until there's a change in government, in my opinion.
No, you're right, because you're asking them to two different. You're doing two different things. You're telling them we're trying to put you out of business, but at the exact same time, it's like, hey, can you help us out? And,
exactly.
And
exactly.
then the Fed's doing the same thing too. They're like, hey, we're trying to slow down the economy as much as possible, but we want you to ramp up production, like we're not trying to do that. And it doesn't work. Yeah. So I don't know, and I'm not knowledgeable enough to know this, but I mean, I mean, we talked about this briefly this morning, but could you like theoretically suspend the Jones Act for like until at least till the next election, and then be like, hey, you probably alienate a little bit of your union base, which is probably I think the biggest one for Joe Biden. But I mean, it could be one of your talking points for the next time around that says, hey, I'm going to reenact the Jones Act, so everything's back to American labor again. But
it's theoretically possible.
Yeah.
It is also politically improbable.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I don't know, like infrastructure wise, I don't know how that works either. One last point I'm also going to make is that for a lot of this, like Alex mentioned, that it's a global market, and it's not like oil companies are artificially, especially like Exxon and Chevron are big companies, but compared to the world market, they're not big enough to prop up the price of oil by themselves. That's generally OPEC and Russia. And then also, if you're asking oil companies to increase supply, there's a very limited number of refineries in the U.S. that can refine oil, and it costs a lot of money to build a new refinery. So when you want to ramp up production, you're limited by the number of refineries in operation, and especially after the pandemic, a lot of them went out of business. Further decreasing the amount of refineries available, and so you're kind of capped by the amount of production available for these refineries. It makes it harder, and it makes it more expensive to expand any meaningful oil operation in America.
Right.
All right. Let's see here. So we'll move on to the second one, which is that the Hang Seng. Oh man, I should probably videotape myself saying this correctly, but the Hang Seng. I don't know. Do you know how to say this?
Hang Seng.
Okay, Hang Seng. All right, because you got a degree in this, didn't you? In Chinese studies. All right, the Hang Seng Index, a gauge of the Chinese stocks listed in Hong Kong, similar to the S&P 500, plunged about 7.3%. in its worst showing after any Communist Party Congress since the inception of the index in 1994. The Communist Party Congress is an event that happens every 5 years where the Chinese government meets to choose a new leadership team and consider changes to its governing charter. Leaders of China typically serve no more than 2 terms, but in 2018, the current president, President Xi, made a change to Chinese constitution, allowing him to serve an uncommon 3rd term. Why do you think markets are down so much based on this, and what are your thoughts about investing in China?
So I do think this is largely in part to what's happening politically and economically in China. Xi Jinping, the concept of the great decoupling as it's become known, is not a one-way street coming from the United States. It's a two-way street from the United States and China, both. And Xi is pretty committed to it at this point. All you have to do is look at his own rhetoric. He's talking about boosting the number of Han Chinese kids, restoring the economy to more socialist principles, getting finance, banking, the housing construction industry in line with socialist and communist party ideals, making these industries and most of the rest of the economy subservient to the state again. This is a big departure from what we've seen the last 4 or 5 decades out of the Chinese government, which has been more state-directed capitalism. Well, they're moving back to more state-directed socialism. And a lot of people who invest in China or who invest in these companies that have been acting more capitalist, they're getting their money out as fast as possible. What you're seeing is capital flight. People are getting money as far away from China as they possibly can, as fast as they can, because they know 5 years from now they're not going to be able to get that money out anymore as capital controls tighten, as bureaucratic control of the banking and financial systems tighten. So is this due to Xi? Yeah, it is. What this means for Chinese or investors in China, whether they're Chinese investors or foreign investors, I think the lesson is you should probably take a long, hard look at what you're investing in China, because otherwise you may be investing in a company that finds itself nationalized and your investment worthless before you know what hit you. So I would say be very careful if you want to invest in China, because the Chinese economy as you know it is done, and a new, more command and control economy is returning under Xi's leadership. So again, definitely buyer beware.
Smart investors read history books. And what they find from history is that in a direction, the more you move towards socialism, the less wealth creation you're going to have. The farther away from socialism and the more you go to free markets, the more you're going to have widespread wealth creation. So people who have money are looking at history and saying, hey, this Xi guy, he's moving more towards socialism and away from capitalism. Out of all the other opportunities in the world for me to store money I'm not using right now, China is not on the top of the list. If they get somebody who's a little bit more friendly to free markets, and I can take some of my spare money and put it someplace and it'll work for me better in China, investors would be doing that like they have shown in the past. But because we're moving in this direction towards socialism in China, instead of this direction towards free markets, we're going to see a flight of dollars out of China. And it just means that somebody else is going to take that money. That money will be invested someplace else. The question is where? Is it going to be in natural resources rich countries in Africa, South America, Latin America? Will the regulatory environment in the United States open up to where we can start investing in our own country again? Who knows? But right now, I'd say yes. The answer is the reason why we're seeing such dramatic declines is because people with spare money to invest don't think that China under this particular premier's leadership is a good place to put your money.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Is that Jack Ma, who owns Alibaba, was openly criticized the government and then went missing for like 2 weeks, and then showed up again. And then his Ant, like his the Ant company, his big financial company that he tried to create, was very critical of the government as well. And basically, the government came in and I don't know if it still exists, but it basically got gutted from the inside, or is essentially state owned at this point. And any investments that you have, like Huawei or like Tencent and like TikTok, all these other Chinese companies, they're essentially state owned companies at this point, and everybody's afraid that what President Xi is going to do them if they criticize the government. In the Congress that was televised, he had the previous president removed from the Congress on live television, and unceremoniously removed from live television. Just and nobody knows exactly why, but it seems like it was just a flex to show that, hey, I'm going to remove anybody who for whatever reason doesn't agree with me. I don't know if they were at ideological odds or not, but it was a very clear display that he'd consolidated power, and that the government is going to do that he's the guy in charge now. And by all analysis that I read, he's very anti the private sector, and he hasn't been very keen on technology companies either, especially when they they thrive under more free market conditions. He hasn't been very favorable to that.
So I'll say something about Hu Jintao being removed. So I watched an interesting video about the history, or the way the Communist Party in China has worked over the last decades. And what typically has been happening is there are different regions in China, but the two that really matter to the governing structure of the country is the central part of China. This is the Yangtze River Valley. It's dominated by agriculture and industrial production. Shanghai is the biggest city in the area, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, container port in the world. It's all about exports, production, that kind of thing. This is where money is. And then you have northern China, which is dominated by the political and military class. And they have generally traded off leadership of the party and the presidency. So Hu Jintao was from the central Chinese, wealthier, more export-driven section of the Communist Party. And Xi Jinping, he's a northerner. He's from the political and military wing of the party that's more about command and control, keeping order and security, that kind of thing. And basically removing Hu Jintao is saying that we no longer care for your wing of the party. The military and security and political class is now going to run the country, and the industrialists and the agricultural guys, they better fall in line, or you're going to find yourself removed from the process too. So from what I understand, China experts think that's largely what's going on with that display at the party Congress.
Yeah, from a national foreign policy or a national defense position, nothing better could happen to the United States. Is that trying to run a nation or trying to run an economy through central planning, it's a recipe for disaster. John Stossel, the guy who used to be on 2020 on ABC, he did a bit where he used an ice skating rink as a example of how central planning works. If you've ever been to an ice skating rink where you've gone skating, people just skate. They go in a circle and they go round and round and round, and some people are going fast and some people are going slow, and some people are good skaters and some people are bad skaters, and there's some people in the middle doing little figure skate tricks and those sorts of things. And then what you do is you put somebody who's like a marshal in the middle of the skating rink, and you tell everybody how to skate. So you're telling people to slow down and speed up, and you make people skate based on your commands. And it's a complete disaster. You got people running each other, and people stand against the wall. It's moving real dysfunctional. That's what an economy is. And the more you can decentralize an economy and get individual problem solvers solving problems, the more productive you're going to be. And China was starting to see that. We saw that with the great economic explosion of China. My biggest fear has always been is that if China ever becomes as free as we are, we're done. So from a defense perspective, I kind of like the idea they're going back to centrally planning their economy, because there's no way they can keep up with this if they do.
Yeah, I mean, China certainly has its, China certainly has a lot of problems that it has to solve. I mean, they have these giant ghost cities that cost it, a lot of money, and they have a lot of debt on cities that there's nobody to live in them to pay taxes on to repay that. On top of that, they're having like droughts and extreme heat, and they have aging population. They got a bunch of issues over there that they have to contend with. So yeah, it's probably not the best place right now. All right, so we'll move on to the lightning round. All right, so Meta's stock is getting crushed as it is down 71% year to date, because investors do not agree with Mark Zuckerberg's plan to invest heavily in the metaverse. Do you agree with Mark, or do you agree with investors?
So I agree with investors. There have been a handful of significantly revolutionary products over the last few decades in the tech space. I mean, think like the PC revolution in the 90s, where, there were computers before, but Windows 95 really brought it to the masses. Then a little more than a decade later, you have the smartphone revolution, where now, 6 devices are now combined into one, and it fits in your pocket. A lot of these tech companies are really trying to force the creation of something new that nobody, like before smartphones, nobody knew they needed a smartphone, and now everybody needs one and has one. And I think everybody's trying to come up with the next smartphone, and metaverse is not going to be it. Nobody cares about VR. They've tried to launch VR products multiple times over the last 20, 30 years, and they never go mainstream. They did a study on the metaverse, one of these metaverse, I think it was like Decentraland or something, where they had like 30 people using it the way they wanted to use it. And they dropped like over $1 billion creating it. I think this is a huge money pit. I think investors are going to continue to punish companies that throw money at this. I can't possibly imagine that this is going to be a success.
Mark Zuckerberg is suffering from classic sunken cost effect. He's gone all in on Meta, and even his own employees aren't enthusiastic about it. They're doing everything they possibly can to get their employees to use it, so that it would have like a networking effect and more people would use it, but nobody wants to. It's too cumbersome. It's not realistic enough. And quite frankly, even though we joke about it a lot in the office, most people would rather live in reality than live in some kind of virtual world. I'm going in with the investors. I think they're making the wise choice.
Yeah, from what I've heard, it's horribly, there's lots of technical glitches, and the engineers designed it so that, you know, your avatar's hands move like as you would expect them to, but none of the rest of their arm does. So sometimes your elbows and stuff are in weird positions. And if you spend enough time with the headset on, like people have reported, even employees have reported being physically nauseous and had to, like, you know, exit the metaverse because they're sick because of the way the avatars are illustrated in the program. And yeah, and it's horribly glitchy, and yeah, there's a lot of issues with it. And you're right, the employees that make it, they don't even use it. So that's a pretty big issue. All right, so we'll move on. Is that researchers at the University of Maryland have developed a sweater that will make you invisible to artificial intelligence, cameras, essentially. So if you're sitting in a coffee shop and there's somebody's like wants to identify who you are, they can look at your facial recognition. This sweater supposedly will prevent that from happening. Unfortunately, the sweater looks ridiculous. So if you are concerned about the government tracking you, do you bite the bullet and wear a ridiculous-looking sweater, or do you find some other method of avoiding surveillance?
So I would probably wear it just because it looks so ridiculous that it would be funny, but otherwise I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. There's probably 3 or 4 devices that people are already carrying around on their own, a tablet, a phone, maybe a smartwatch, that kind of thing. They're already tracking, listening, recording, you name it, everything you're doing. So if the government really wants to find out where you are, there are probably a dozen ways they can do it already. So I don't think it makes much of a difference, but it is a cool technology that they figured out how to do that.
Well, you phrased the question in terms of, if you were afraid of facial recognition, would you wear the sweater? Absolutely. I'm already married. I'm not on the dating scene. I can look as goofy as I want. And if my goal is to not be seen on AI, I'll wear a stupid sweater.
I guess my point is that the sweater looks so ridiculous that if you walked into a coffee shop wearing this, if the government was really concerned about where you are, they'd be able to tell instantly that you were in a coffee shop. The only way this would be inconspicuous if you were at an ugly sweater Christmas party. That would pretty much be the only way. I guess my point is that it's so non-inconspicuous. It's just so like loud and obnoxious that you basically give away where you're at just by wearing it around. And so that's my thing. And Alex is right. Your phone and everything tracks you enough, so I don't think it would matter. But you're right. It is kind of fun to look at. But I don't think Jason Bourne would be donning the sweater anytime soon. All right, and last question before we run out of time is that at the Professional Cornhole Championship in August of this year, it was found that both competitors had illegally sized bags. Both competitors claimed that this was unintentional, and do you believe them?
So a few things. First of all, I'm always shocked that Cornhole has gotten so big that it's now broadcast on ESPN. I just think that that's funny. Second, it's probably not a sport until everybody's cheating in some way. I mean, you can go to like these websites called yourteamcheats.com or something like that and just look at every team in football, for example, like all the ways that their players or the team are cheating year after year. Finally, I was unfortunately unable to find out how off the weight was that they were both accused of being of cheating. I think they were slightly underweight, but I couldn't find out how much they weighed. So do I believe them? I guess. I mean, it could just be a manufacturing issue, so who knows?
To be honest, I've been so enthralled with the global Tiddlywink World Series that I just missed the whole cornhole controversy. But the answer to your question is that I don't think they were cheating. They're beanbags, for goodness sakes. Is that there's going to be some disparity and some variety in the beanbags, So I don't think there was any sort of nefarious activity going on here.
Yeah. I guess I have 2 points. Is one, I guess I wouldn't be so much concerned about cheating. I just want to know like what their parents' reaction is when they decide that their son or daughter wants to devote their life to cornhole. It's like, I'm going to be a professional cornhole player. It's like, and your parents are just like, yeah, do it, or they just, or do you have to like just, you know, basically like, you know, screw you, mom, dad, I'm gonna do whatever I want. I don't know. How does that conversation go? I don't know. I mean, maybe they're highly supportive. I don't know if there's enough money to be made in cornhole to make it worth it. But and then 2 is that, you know, everything Alex says has to be taken with a grain of salt because he's a Houston Astros fan, and you know.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so bear that in mind, you know, is that, yeah, so just take that with a grain of salt. But other than that, yeah, I mean, the bags, I don't think there's enough rules in cornhole yet to, you know, to actually, you know, really hit these guys with a cheating scandal. From what I've heard is that, you know, cornhole players like run over the bags with a car just to kind of thin them out, but who knows. But that's it for episode 60 of Farm to Markets. We'll see you again next week.